fictional friends. Welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it is the end of April. It's the last week of April. By the time this episode drops, it will be heading out of April and into May, heading further into that spring, summer start of the season.
Be gone, vile winter.
Hooray. Yeah, no, we hate you. Get lost. Yeah. At least the day that we're recording this, it's nice out. So that's,
it is.
So that's good.
It's true.
And actually, yeah, by the time this drops, we're even going to be getting more adaptations coming out, because I'm pretty sure that by the time this episode comes out, I think first ever, for some reason, film adaptation of Judy Blume's "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret" is going to be out.
Oh,
which I was like, wow, no one's ever made this before.
I was going to say, have they made any Judy Blume books
I don't
into
know.
movies or shows?
I don't know.
It's weird.
And it's just like, it's just one of those books that, like, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s and you didn't read Judy Blume, like, who were you?
It's true.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah,
I was never a huge fan personally, but yeah.
They were fun enough, you know, growing up. But we also, like, I guess we didn't have as much, like, they weren't shoved at us as much. I think in the States you get a lot of.
Yeah, I think so.
A lot of Judy Blume. But yeah, when I saw that was happening, I was like, wow, I kind of want to see it. I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to do.
Nostalgia.
It's going to be fun.
We can go to our local cheap movie theater.
Oh, we can do. Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we'll do that, and then we'll like record a bonus episode about it or something. Yeah. That sounds fun. Let's do that. But that's not what we're here for. We're here for the end of Canadian Literature Month, everybody. We're closing out all of our coverage on Canadian Literature Month since it's the end of April, and we thought that what we would do this week to kind of close things out is that since we're speaking about Canadian literature, I think that at this point you can't really speak about Canadian literature and really not get into Indigenous literature in Canada. Mm-hmm. You know, what it is, what it means, and how important it is to the scope of the world of reading in Canada, like what that really means now.
Yeah. And I think, like, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, it's so important as Canadians for us to read, hear these voices, and to acknowledge the nations within this one nation of Canada. Yeah,
this whole nation, and to choose, you know, I think it's important to take the choice, to make that choice, to educate yourself about issues of the First Nations and Indigenous peoples of Canada, in our case, but obviously of the world over, of course, it's important as well. So we thought that what we would do this week is kind of have a talk about sort of our top 5 choices of Canadian Indigenous books that we think that everybody should, you know, take the time to pick up and read, really.
Yep. And, you know, we'll just preface by saying that just a little bit of educational nuggets here for you. The term Indigenous in Canada is applied to what we would call status Indians, Métis, Inuit, and non-status Indians. Mm-hmm. We do use the term Indigenous in Canada as like an umbrella term for all these different peoples. Yeah. And it's important to note that words such as Aboriginal are no longer used. Indian is no longer used. However, it does have legal connotations because of the Indian Act that exists, in Canada. The government has the Indian Act. They have not yet changed the wording. And Indigenous peoples, they have, if they are status Indians, they have a card, an ID card that is the, status Indian card.
Yes.
So the only reason why the word Indian should be used now when referring to Indigenous or First Nations peoples is really from a legal perspective
in order to separate those different different peoples from different backgrounds.
Right.
Yeah.
However, otherwise do not be using that terminology.
No.
I just did my taxes, and I'm going to call you out, TurboTax. It was written all over Indian.
Oh, you're kidding.
I swear I had to stand up and just like stop looking at it because it was like like, are you Indian? Do you have Indian people living in your house? Like, I couldn't believe the questions.
Oh my God.
It's just like, it's not on, you know?
Wow.
So I'm calling out TurboTax here. Like, y'all really have to do better.
Yeah, God, TurboTax, like, pay attention to your shit and update it. What's wrong with you guys?
Seriously.
Like, we're at this point. It's 2023.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like, Shireen's just given us, like, a full, proper, you know, lesson in sort of, like, comportment and how to go about speaking about Indigenous peoples. But, like, she shouldn't have to. But it is a thing.
It is a thing.
That does need to be, you know, done on a regular basis.
Yeah, and if you want to get involved, or not involved, but just learn more, May, there is Red Dress Day coming up.
Yes, that's true.
May 11th is the Moose Hide Campaign Day. So the Moose Hide Campaign is a company that creates pins that you can order for free, whether you want moose hide or non-animal hide. And you can order them in batches of 25. They encourage you to order a lot so that you can hand them out.
Okay.
And the intent is that you wear your pin and you start conversations about the missing and murdered Indigenous girls and women and two-spirited people in Canada, which is a big topic.
And it's a big issue, unfortunately, which continues to this day. If you ever go down a true crime rabbit hole of something like the Highway of Tears, unfortunately, that's kind of where you get into a lot of that. However, that will give you a ton of information as to what has happened and continues to happen to this day in different areas of Canada. Ozzy's having a moment, guys. He's also mad that anybody has to look into this in the first place because it's such a big fucking problem. Yeah,
it is.
Good for you.
Good for you, Oz.
And you know what? Actually, I'm going to, even before we talk a little bit about like the rest of it as well, Truth and Reconciliation, I'm going to, I'll try to link a couple of resources to some of these campaigns in the show notes too. If you guys ever want to go read a little bit more about it, to learn more if you don't have that much knowledge about it right now, totally understandable. So if you want to go read more about it, or if you'd like to donate or contribute maybe to some of these campaigns, that would be a really nice thing to do. So I'll try to add a couple of links in the show notes as well for everybody.
Yeah, and we can add some more about June, which is Indigenous History Month.
Yes.
And in September 30th is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada. I've heard from, a few Indigenous people that the sentiment is that there can be no reconciliation without truth, and truth comes with knowledge and education. And so the books that we're going to talk about today are a really great way of starting that learning journey, a personal learning journey into what it means to be Canadian, and to acknowledge that we have a pretty gross history around Indigenous folks.
And unfortunately, it feels as though in these last 3 or 4 years, there's just the time that we're really starting to kind of
acknowledge it,
kind of crack that egg open. And boy, is it running everywhere. The egg is just spilled all over the place.
Oh yeah. And the more
there's
you
no way to
start
put it back in the fucking shell now.
No.
It's broken, so you may as well just do everything that you can now to clean up the mess
and do it right.
Yeah.
So this is what I encourage everybody on listening.
Yeah, don't just leave it on the counter.
Don't leave it on the
wipe
counter.
Up the spill and acknowledge that you broke the fucking egg. You did it.
Exactly. And let's all be better. Let's all be more knowledgeable and know how to move forward on this.
Yeah, Shireen's much better at this because I just came up with a weird egg analogy, but you know what I mean.
But I like your egg analogy.
I'm just saying,
I'm going to start using that.
Don't walk away. You know what I mean? Don't leave the egg. Don't leave the egg running all over the counter and then blame the fucking dog for it.
Yeah.
No. Just go get a paper towel and do what you can to pick it up properly and clean up the mess that you made, and acknowledge that you made that fucking mess to begin with.
Yep.
So
we all did.
And even if you didn't, the people before you did. So don't come at me with any of that whole, I didn't do anything. Well, obviously not, okay?
We're all guilty.
Yeah, that's it. So you know what? We're at the very least guilty of not being aware of things. That's usually what most of us are guilty of, I would say, is not being aware of these problems. So it's a good time to do that. So yes, I'll definitely leave some links as much as possible anyway in the show notes. Yep. Before we get into our list really quickly, Shireen, what's on your nightstand right now?
Because our next month is fantasy, YA fantasy month. So I got...
Everybody get really excited.
Get real excited. I got kickstarted on some I don't even think it's YA. I think it might have started off as YA, but it is certainly not YA.
Okay.
The series A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah Moss.
I don't even know if you have to like introduce it. I'm pretty sure most people, even if they haven't read it, they've like heard of it.
Pretty much. It's fantasy. I would say high fantasy.
Sure.
Fae, all that. Very smutty. It's great.
It's good. Well, okay, so background, Shireen had COVID a couple of weeks ago for the first time in like the 3 years that this has been a thing, and so she had to barricade herself at home and not really go anywhere or do anything for like a week. And so it gave you all this time.
A lot of time.
All I'm getting are things where she's just there and she's like, oh yeah, no, I'm all the way through the first book, and I think she told me, I think she described it as spicy like 7 different times.
Because it is like you're just like reading it and you're just like, oh dear, it's a good thing this isn't loud because somebody would be walking in here thinking I'm doing all sorts of things.
It's good thing this isn't like an audio book that I'm listening to. My mom comes in and I'm like, it's not porn, I swear.
Yeah, I swear. It kind of is, though, book form. But no, okay. Very good. I've realized that there's a huge following, obviously.
Oh, my God.
Of all things Sarah Moss, Sarah J. Moss. So she also wrote the Throne of Glass right, series, which I had read actually a few years ago.
Okay.
And I quite liked it. It was like, spicy in its own way, but there was a lot more world building. Whereas this one is like, let's just fucking get right into it, you know? And I was like, all right, like I'm here for it.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, so, that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, these books have absolutely exploded. I need to look into whether or not anybody's actually picked them up to like turn them into a TV series. Cause
they have Hulu bought the rights to them.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Okay, so they'll get around to it eventually because I just feel like it has such a massive following, that you could do it.
Yeah, you can make a ton of money on this.
Oh, for sure.
Like, this is like going to be like the new Twilight, but
kind of. Yeah,
But,
I think it will too. Like in the sense of its followers, probably. Yeah, like not like the content itself of the stories.
In terms of followers, like the amount of memes and stuff and groups and
people who are just
merchandise. And
Sarah Moss has really established herself as like a titan of like fantasy at this point. Like I think she's like one of these like modern fantasy masters, kind of, just because of how much of a following she's built up. It's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild.
A Court of Thorn and Roses and Throne of Glass, both of which are like quite popular.
Yeah, and she's also got her, are they called Crescent City?
The
other series that she's got. Side note, I have like spooky like library shelves because I was sure that I had a Court of Thorns of Roses physical copy. Can't find it. I don't know. It's disappeared.
Your fucking books just... We had this conversation about Twilight like not long ago.
This one disappeared. I had to read it. I had to get it on my Kindle, read that, and then like, my husband kindly went out and bought me the physical copies of all the other ones because I didn't have it.
Yeah.
And then I go to put them on my bookshelf because I'd finished reading them, and I look, and I've got both the Crescent City books, which I have no recollection of buying, and I'm like, okay, I'm just confused.
You're like, I'm fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anywho. Yes, Megan, what's on your nightstand?
Okay, so I feel like, and I told you this, but I feel like I'm over my hump of like that January, February period, like January, February into March period where I'm just annoyed because of how wintry it is and I just can't bring myself to read very much. I think I've like kind of made it over that hurdle, so I've actually been reading for the last like few weeks without too much of an issue. So I'm in the middle. Okay, so I just finished Legends and Lattes, which, like, yes, I know I just got around to reading it now. It's so fucking cute. It's
you brought it
so
for me.
cute. I brought it for Shireen because it's so cute. It's just like a warm hug of a book. Like it's like based on D&D. It's high fantasy, but there's like no stakes to it at all. It's just cute. It's just adorable. It's got a little love story, but like it's just a little cutesy thing, and I loved it. It was just adorable, and I got through it in like a day.
It's cute.
And right now, I'm in the middle of Crave by Tracy Wolff.
You haven't finished that yet?
No, I'm not done. I haven't had a chance to get through the rest of it. If you guys haven't, I need you guys to like look up the cover if you haven't, because if you, just from reading the description of the book, if you didn't already think that this was like heavily inspired by Twilight, look at the cover art for the book and you will be like, oh wow, like it could fit right into that fucking universe without an issue. So young girl, very unremarkable, etc., meek, boring, loses both her parents, gets sent to live with her uncle in Alaska because he runs some sort of very fancy boarding school up in the mountains in Alaska. There are hot people everywhere because I'm sure all the sexiest people live in Alaska. There are super hot guys all over the place. All of them seem to be obsessed with her. You know, everybody is like keeping secrets and no one tells you what's going on. I'm like almost halfway through the book and no one has given any indication to her. And it's one of those things where when I read these sorts of things like in Twilight, I was like, oh my God, so mysterious when I was like 15. And now I'm just fucking annoyed. Like, cause she's just walking around. She's like, why won't anyone tell me what's happening? And I'm like, seriously, bitch, like, why won't anyone tell you what's happening?
I can have no time for this anymore.
Man. It's terrible. And I'm probably going to read all of them is all I can say.
We have we're completionists, and we put ourselves through the ringer because of it. But one thing I will say to segue from, Twilight into our conversation.
Yeah.
Because I read this.
Speaking of First Nations people.
Exactly, because I read this yesterday as a reminder. So Twilight is being made into a TV series.
Oh my God, yeah. Have you guys seen this? Just like blow my fucking mind.
Like as if we didn't have enough with the OG version. They're making a TV series, which I will, of course, watch.
Obviously.
However, shout out to the Twilight shitposting group on Facebook, fellow ratties.
You're really showing your age right now.
If you're listening, the admin made a very interesting post yesterday, which I can absolutely get behind. So there is, a whole following out there of people who, love Twilight and
Obviously.
They post shitty memes about it. But this group does annual,
It'll come to you.
Levée de fonds.
Oh, fundraisers. Sorry.
They do annual fundraisers for the Indigenous peoples who were represented in Twilight because so Stephanie Meyer never acknowledged or spoke to these peoples before she included their
histories and their legends and whatnot in the
her Twilight
Oh no,
universe.
I'm sure she did zero research.
She did. I don't know if she did research or not. And from what I've read, some of the people who live, on the reservation that's depicted in Twilight, they're both, happy, and then there's those who are angry because, it's not a hive mind, so everybody has their own thoughts on this. But what did happen was after Twilight, a whole bunch of tourists started going
to Washington and that whole area.
They went onto the Indigenous land without being invited. They started just kind of like swarming, the land. And so eventually, like the reservation, they had to, put barriers up and say like, no, like we're not allowing just anybody to walk onto our land. Like this is our home. It's like walking into somebody's house and being like, oh, this was in a movie. And so what the sentiment is now is that until there's some sort of reconciliation done towards these Indigenous peoples that were included in Twilight, we should not be celebrating the fact that there is a TV show coming out unless they're guaranteeing that they're going to make some sort of step towards reconciliation for the wrong
and
that's
perhaps
been done.
Correct representation of these peoples as well. I don't blame the like people like Taylor Lautner for things like this. He's not a casting director, so and you're trying to be an actor, you're trying to make money. It makes total sense, but like why was the lead of them the only one who wasn't First Nations in those films?
I know. But
why?
I think that they swapped them out. I think in the first movie there was a lot of
them were. No, a lot of them were even in the later ones too. They? Like what's his name? Seth and Sam, I think.
What's her
name?
And
a couple of the other ones too.
Leah.
Yes.
Billy,
what's his name? There's like a very hot-headed one whose name I can't remember. Paul, is it?
Jared.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jared was, but
I don't know. But a lot of them, I did look into it a little bit, and a lot of them were.
Harry Clearwater also is Indigenous, the actor who plays him.
He's in a ton of shit.
He's in a lot of stuff. So is Billy, though.
Yes.
And I think this kind of goes back to like that sentiment that they have in Hollywood, where it's like, okay, great, like we're starting to get more Asian representation, more Indigenous, but it's all the same for people.
Yeah, it's like the same,
you know?
like, yeah, that's it. They're like, no, we can't be bothered to expand our sort of breadth of, like, you know, like, here are, like, the 10 people whose headshots we've got. Okay, let's just pick one out of a hat.
From them.
And let's just roll with that. So I do think that there are, like, small strides that are being made in certain things. Like, if you guys have seen the latest Predator movie there, Prey, that came out last year. Yeah. It's like a prequel because it's a predator that comes to Earth in, like, way back, like at the beginning, without all the technology, like as much technology, et cetera, at a time where, and is on Comanche land. And all of the actors who played the Comanche people were Indigenous. Obviously, they were all First Nations people. And apparently, first of all, there's a Comanche dubbing that exists for the film, which is fucking cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because it helps keep the language going a little bit as well. And initially, the director, Dan Trachtenberg, I think, who isn't First Nations, he actually wanted the whole film to be in Comanche to begin with.
Good for
which
him.
I thought was pretty chill. But anyway, and there's really, like, that film, like, it seems stupid, but it's nice to have the representation that exists in, like, a blockbuster style film. Yeah. It's too bad because I think it was released directly to, like, Hulu, and that would have been a cool movie to see in theaters. There's a lot of good action shit in there. Yeah. But yeah, like, they, you know, so they had, like, some of their actors and stuff like that. Like, the lead, she's a First Nations woman. Her name's Amber Midthunder, which is also the coolest fucking name I've ever heard.
Oh, there are some cool ones.
I know. You know, so, like, it's like there are productions that are beginning to do this in a way that makes sense. It's set at that time. So obviously those are the people who would be there.
Yeah, totally.
Filmed way up in Alberta because, of course, everything's pretty there.
No, exactly. So, so let's get into our discussion.
Right. So, we're going through a list of 5 books, right? So the first book on our list is 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. I'm going to let Shireen take this one a little bit because I haven't read it. Yeah. She has, so she'll have, like, a much better grasp on this than I will.
So, 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. I had the opportunity to hear Michelle talk about it and also read an excerpt from the book. And as the author, she was unable to get through the excerpt without shedding a few tears.
Yeah, that's fair.
And, you know, it was the first time I had heard any of it. And it was really tough. And so then I went and I read the book. So it was published in 2020. And Michelle Good made a point of explaining that the 5 individuals depicted in the story are fictional characters. Yeah. However, their stories are derived from real stories that she was aware of, she'd heard. And so what it is it's the story of 5, as she calls them, 5 little Indians. So 5 little Indigenous children who were taken from their families and put in residential schools. And so for those of you who are not familiar, the residential school system, we should not even call them schools. They were camps.
It's I don't want to say what it's like, but it's like, think of camp in a negative way, and you'll probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they were, I guess,
for kids, though.
Re-education camps.
Yeah.
The intent was to, what was the sentiment? Take the Indian out of the child is what they wanted to do.
It was very much to westernize them, basically, to make them into, like, more like actual North American peoples for whatever reason they decided. So these children were yanked from their homes and their families, and they were placed in these quote unquote schools.
Yeah. You know, if you think that this sounds horrible, it was. And if you think that this happened many, many years ago, the last residential school closed in the mid-90s. So this is a very current, like, recent history that we should acknowledge. They found thousands of unmarked graves in, I think it was 2020, was it?
I believe that was kind of the beginning of
Truth and Reconciliation and all this. And so, so there's a very bloody history around the residential schools. But what Michelle Good did was demonstrate what that life was like for these children from their points of view. And so it follows 5 of them, and it really digs deep into your soul. You know, one of them, he gets taken from his home and he keeps escaping and going back home. And you'd think like, oh, well, you know, he escapes, but the families and the parents were so afraid of, you know, the government and what they would do. So they have to bring the children back, or, you know, there's no way of hiding them because they're afraid that they're going to come back and take them. One of the little boys, he finally escapes, and he stays escaped. I'm using like air quotes here. And he's been gone for a fair few amount of years. And when he left, you know, he had this image of his home and his mom where they would fish and they would hunt together, and she would dry the fish and dry, you know, the meat and the pelts, and, you know, she was always doing that kind of thing. And when he goes back, when he finally gets away, he goes back and he finds his mom, and at this point she's she's now an alcoholic, because another part of our gruesome history towards Indigenous peoples is that the government, you know, kind of supplied them with so he, you know, so another part is that the government, you know, supplied a lot of alcohol, tobacco to Indigenous peoples. Anyways, I'm not going to get into that, but
no, I mean, also like read it. Like we don't have to give you the whole synopsis.
Like we don't have to give you everything, but like, you know, just to give you an excerpt, like, you know, he goes and he finds his mom, and she's an alcoholic at this point, and she's just not the same person. Yeah. And what Michelle Good is trying to demonstrate is that, you know, this boy was his mother's entire life and purpose of living. Yeah. And they took him away, and she had nothing left.
Once he's gone, and what else do I don't have anything to live for.
And it's not an automatic like, oh, well, he's back now, so I can snap out of it and go back, you know.
Not addiction is what it is, unfortunately. And I'm sure that a lot of people who've, you know, dealt with anything like this, or have family members or friends who have, understand that it's not a process where you can turn it on and off whenever you feel like it.
Absolutely. You know, and the excerpt that Michelle Good read, you know, it was about one of the other characters. She is finally allowed to go back home, and when she gets home, you know, her parents are still loving and they were waiting for her, but she is changed. She's been through so much trauma
she's
that
different.
She can no longer be loved. She doesn't know how to be loved anymore.
No, because they were treated just atrociously at these places. So.
And so she has to leave her parents and go on her own way. And so it's a very sad novel, but I think everybody should read it. It's beautifully written. It's hard to read, but it really deserves that amount of attention, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So book 2, I guess for a little bit more fun for the second one kind of on our list, the second book that we wanted to talk about was Green Grass Running Water by Thomas King. This is a novel that takes a lot more, which is really, really interesting if that's something that you're interested in. If it takes a lot more of the folklore and legends from First Nations, and really uses those in a fictionalized sort of story, and puts like a really interesting and fun twist on the history of these peoples, and told from the perspective, you know, of characters who may or may not be deities of some sort. We're not 100% sure.
You're really not sure, and the whole time you're reading it, you just don't really know, but like you just kind of gotta go with it.
It's,
you know?
very tongue-in-cheek, like the way, like the style and the prose, the way that like Thomas King's written it is very, very like that. It's very kind of like we're poking fun at like the white people, you know, and sort of everything like that, and at the government and stuff. But they do it in a very lighthearted sort of way. And it's just, I mean, like, whatever. I find folklore from pretty much every culture fascinating in some way, shape, or form. And First Nations people have like such an interestingly rich history of the way that they pass down moments in time to younger generations. It's fascinating to read about, and just like a lot of like the legends and things that exist. And even, you know, when we were kind of like getting back into talking about the book and stuff, like just how so many of the legends that they speak about really have to do with things that occur in nature, like natural disasters. You know, a lot of those, when the stories were passed down to people, would be linked to, you know, to a trickster doing this, or because of like this particular deity singing or whatever, like this particular god was singing too loud and then it caused this earthquake to happen. And it's just really cool. It's really interesting to kind of like get into that from like, and it's a cool way to learn about some of the history of it. While also, you know, I like gaining knowledge about like people and gaining knowledge about their stories and their backgrounds.
I agree. And the title of the novel, Green Grass Running Water, is said to be in reference to the Canadian government promising the Indigenous people rights to their land as long as the grass is green and the water runs. So it's, again, Thomas King
poking fun and poking at them to be like, haha, you guys are fucking liars.
You suck.
Which is, you know, it's true.
Exactly.
We know this. So book number 3 is called Seven Fallen Feathers. The full title is actually Seven Fallen Feathers, Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in a Northern City by Tanya Talaga. I feel like I'm going to butcher people's names. I'm really sorry. But I believe that this is like a nonfiction, right? This is all...
It's interesting because it's written... I have read this. It's written in kind of a... So Tanya Talaga.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So she's a journalist.
Yeah, okay.
The book starts with her going to speak to... I believe he's the kind of like the chief of all nations. And they have like their own kind of, I don't want to say the word government, but you understand what I'm saying. In Thunder Bay, Ontario. And so she goes to speak to him, and she's asking him about the Harper government. You know, like, how are you feeling about Harper and yada yada.
Yeah. And Stephen Harper, just as an FYI, was a previous prime minister that we had before Justin Trudeau, who's currently the prime minister. And this gentleman, he will not answer any of her questions. Okay. All he keeps saying is, why have you not looked into the seven fallen feathers,
seven teenagers who were murdered? Why are you not looking into it? And so she does. She starts diving into it, and then it kind of switches, and it starts telling the story from the point of view of one of the boys. And it explains that many Indigenous teenagers in Canada, when they live in very remote locations, to have access to, you know, further education or opportunities. Like in this case, this one character, he had a lot of potential to become a famous hockey player.
Jordan Wabbis.
That's right. And he had to leave his family, which many of them have to do.
Yes,
and go to
because they live
Bay.
further up north, and because north of Thunder Bay there are like quite a few different reservations, and a lot of the kids, if they want any form of education, do need to go to Thunder Bay. And unfortunately, Thunder Bay has a really, really shady history with First Nations people. You know, because obviously this is, you know, mostly looking into these 7 young men who were killed.
I think there was a girl who
in
was
the Thunder.
killed
Were there?
Too. Yeah,
it's possible. Who were killed in the Thunder Bay area. I recently... All of this is making me think of this, and I haven't read this particular book, but now I feel like I should. All of this is making me think of a podcast turned into docuseries that I watched recently about Thunder Bay, specifically from, I think it's Ryan McMahon, who has like done like a podcast about this, but then also like sort of went into a docuseries. I think it's a 3 or 4 part docuseries in which he, you know, he's like from the Thunder Bay area. He returned there and is looking into these reasons why a lot of these young people have been killed, are being killed, continue to disappear, and sort of like what the issue is with the Thunder Bay area and what it is that causes such tension between like the white people and the First Nations people in these areas, and why it's still being allowed to happen, why these cases aren't being investigated, why no one is really taking them seriously, and they're sort of being just like buried pretty much without any real inquest being completed. It was a good docuseries. It's, you know, it's upsetting, but you do get a lot of, it was interesting to, you know, hear from a lot of, that's it, like the First Nations people who did exactly that, moved from a reservation into the city and have experienced just hate and violence and all kinds of just like atrocious things. And he does look into a lot of, that's it, like these specific cases of these kids who were killed for no reason, basically, but then whose cases were treated as though they weren't murdered. It's really weird.
And that's kind of what this is about, you know? So this is a really good one if you want that kind of insight into... From
like an investigative journalist, basically.
And like the continuous ugly history, you know, like it's ongoing. You know, I mentioned earlier the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people. This is like a very big problem that we have, is, you know, if an Indigenous person gets murdered, why is there no investigation that goes into it? You know, if someone goes missing, why are you not investigating it? What's happening? And this novel really, you know, kind of explores that as well.
Yeah, so this is a great one. And yeah, if you want to either watch the Thunder Bay docuseries or listen to I think it's a Canada Land podcast series that was done back in like 2018 or 19 about it, those are always, that'll give you probably just a ton of information about this area, and unfortunately kind of everything that happens with it. So that's, you know, that's an important one, I think, for educational purposes and for kind of understanding what all of this is.
And those three that we just mentioned, those are like adult novels?
Yes, much more. Now we've got a couple of recommendations for the youngins too.
Yeah, because everybody needs to be getting into this.
For sure, yeah. So, you know, so if people want to look at something like to sort of get their children into learning about Indigenous cultures and traditions and history, hardships, any of it really, positive, negative, whatever it is. So the next book on our list is called Fatty Legs. And it's written by Christy Jordan Fenton, Margaret Pokiak Fenton, and Liz Amini Holmes, who illustrated it because it is like a graphic novel, middle grade style graphic novel, basically. This is based on a true story. So Margaret Pokiak Fenton, she is an Inuk woman who, as a young girl, was sent to a residential school from up north. You know, she had no choice really but to go to one because nobody was really given an option at that time. And so, you know, she experiences all kinds of different things with really terrible teachers who treat them, you know, horribly. But she's very strong-willed and she pushes back against a lot of it. And one of the big thing about it is that they order all of these ugly gray stockings that the girls have to wear, except Margaret, who they give a pair of bright red stockings to. And so everybody makes fun of her and she decides to get rid of them completely. And then, you know, it's sort of like everything that she dealt with while she was there, where she kind of mostly refused to conform to what was expected of her and kind of her experience in that school. It's probably going to be like an upsetting one to a certain extent, but it is like a middle grade level book, so I don't think that it's going to be something that like people can't handle when they're younger. It's still a good thing to like show your kids that not everything is sunshine and roses all the time.
It's supposed to be quite inspiring too.
Yeah, a lot of people are very like happy to be able to have read it, and a lot of people are like, you know, I wish that this had existed when I was younger, basically.
And the final one we have is a children's book.
Yeah, it's called What's My Superpower by Aviak Johnston. I'm so sorry. This is terrible. I'm not going to be able to pronounce anybody's name properly.
No, there's really no excuse.
No, I know. And it's illustrated by Tim Mack. this follows a young character. It's a full picture book. This one's really for like probably grade school level, I would think. A character named Nelvana, who's upset because she feels like all of her friends have these really fun powers, and they can, like, you know, some of them are really strong, or they can run really fast, or they can do something really cool. And so she's like, well, I feel like everybody has superpowers and I don't have any superpowers. Like, what are they? You know, what's my superpower? So she has to, you know, go through finding out what makes her special, and her mom helps her and stuff. And she's like up north, I think, in the Northwest Territories, possibly, or in Nunavut. Anyway, she's a young Inuk girl who kind of just like, but it's like I think it's a really cute introduction for kids, because like all the illustrations, everything, it's very set up in those areas. And so it gives kids the opportunity to kind of like get a feel for what the landscape is like there, and sort of like what the day-to-day looks like for a lot of kids as well. So I think that's probably the most lighthearted one on the list, but it's nice because it, you know, it gives kids like a little introduction to
and
like Inuit people.
You know, like you said, like, you know, it's also really fun to read stories that are, you know, explaining kind of the culture and learn more of that side of things. Like it's not all doom and gloom.
No,
like
it's
the
not like
that's out there.
It's not like everybody's always negative all the time and everything's always awful every day all the time. And I think that most people understand that, but I do think that it's difficult for a lot of people to realize that, simply because the media puts forth that everything's very negative all the time and that there's no positive ever at all. So I think that, you know, I think that these kinds of books are great as well, because it gives you know, authors, illustrators, whoever, an opportunity to point out that, like, hey, we have this lovely landscape and this wonderful rich history, and it's nice to be able for people to be educated by that without seeing just like the terribleness of all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So we'll put resources out there.
Yeah, we'll put some resources in the show notes.
Some lists. I mean, actually, the government of Canada has a reading list.
Oh my God.
I think it might be a little outdated, because I think that they published it in 2020, so I think that there's a lot more.
Oh, there's probably a lot more coming out now, and there always is, which is great. So that's always something that's good to keep up with, as well as just new stories that are being published on a regular basis too. You know, there are tons of places, like we're like, as we're talking about this, I'm realizing, oh yeah, like, you know, I've listened to that podcast, I have watched that documentary. There are tons of places where you can find resources and you can find information. You know, if you're like not sure of where to start, you can start here, of course, but there are tons of places that you can go and start to read about some of the history, and then find sort of what kinds of stories you'd like to start with as well.
Any bit of education is
good
step.
I think,
know?
I think for anybody, anywhere, any kind of education, like, knowledge is good. Knowledge is good to have. So,
yep, exactly. So we want to hear from you.
Yeah. Have you guys read any of these books? Because that's always cool to hear from people who have. So have you guys read any of these books, or do you have any other recommendations of, you know, like First Nations or Indigenous, I should say, Canadian books that you think should be on a list, that you think everybody should pick up and should read? You can let us know about that over on Instagram at fullybookedca, or you can check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/book was way better. And I hope that you're still here with us and that you've really enjoyed Canadian Literature Month as a whole. And also, you know, this episode really we're delving into like more socio-political issues to an extent, and human rights issues. But I hope that you're still here and that you've kind of enjoyed a little bit of what we've done. If you have, you can feel free to really leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening to the episode, because it really just helps us get the show out in front of more people. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.